Navy SEAL and his K9 took shelter in an abandoned cabin until a girl knocked and changed everything. Snow drifted over upper Wisconsin like a slow burial, falling in thick white sheets that drowned every sound in the forest. Jake Mercer stepped out of his beat-up Ford Ranger and let the winter air cut through his jacket. The cold felt cleaner than the dust storms of Syria, cleaner than the smoke of the mission he left behind. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around him like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry anymore. Logan hopped down from the truck bed, landing heavier than he used to. The 8-year-old German Shepherd paused, shifting his weight off his injured hind leg. His breath fogged the air in steady bursts as he scanned the tree line, ears forward, body ready. Even with the limp, he carried himself like a soldier who never retired. Jake gave the dog a slow rub between the shoulders. "Easy, buddy. We made it." Logan leaned into the touch, then trotted toward the small stone cabin crouched beneath the pines. Maple Hollow Cabin. Jake had bought it for $500 from an online county-seized property auction. The place looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1980s. Roof patched with mismatched shingles. Window frames warped with age. A door that sagged on its hinges like someone had slammed it too many times. "Perfect," Jake murmured. "A place the world forgot." Inside, the air was colder than outside, thick with the smell of old wood and ash. Jake set down his duffel and pushed the door closed behind him. The latch clicked in a tired, reluctant way. Logan moved ahead, nose low, tail steady, mapping the room with silent precision. He paused at the back wall, pressing his snout against a warped wooden plank. "Not today," Jake said. "Probably mice." But Logan didn't move. His ears twitched, then he looked back at Jake with an expression Jake knew too well. Alert. Not threat. Not fear. Something else. Something older. Jake tried to shake it off. After years of missions, after the explosion that killed Samuel Ortiz and tore through Logan's leg, he'd learned that dogs remembered places differently. They smelled history. Still, it made the back of his neck prickle. He dropped a log into the stone fireplace and struck a match. Fire caught slowly, throwing soft gold across the floorboards. Jake sat on the edge of the old couch, rubbing the stiffness from his hands. The quiet pressed in on him, the kind that reminded him he was alone now. No teammates, no mother waiting for his call. Just a dog who refused to give up. "You and me, Logan. That's it." Wind shoved against the cabin. Snow hit the windows hard enough to rattle them. Logan drifted toward Jake's side, but paused again at the same spot in the wall, letting out a low chuff. Not a growl, not a warning, a signal. Jake's brow tightened. "What are you picking up?" Before he could step closer, a gust slammed against the door with enough force to shake the frame. Logan spun towards the entrance, body stiffening, ears pinned forward. He gave one sharp bark. Deep. Urgent. Jake stood, hand instinctively going to the knife strapped at his boot. The storm outside roared, swallowing the cabin in white noise. But beneath it, he heard something else. Footsteps crunching through the snow. Uneven. Slow. Someone pushing through the blizzard toward them. Logan stepped in front of Jake, shoulders squared, ready despite the pain in his leg. His amber eyes locked on the door, unblinking. A shadow emerged behind the frosted glass. First a blur, then a figure leaning heavily against the frame. A second slam shook the hinges. Jake reached for the handle, breath tightening. "Who the hell is out here?" He cracked the door open. Wind knifed into the room. Snow swirled around a young woman standing on the porch, drenched to the bone, hair crusted with ice. She hugged a small wooden box tight to her chest, as if it were the only warm thing left in the world. Her lips were blue. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, are you Jake Mercer?" Jake froze. He had never seen her, never heard her name, yet she said his like she'd rehearsed it. Logan walked forward. Jake expected a growl, a warning, some sign of distrust. But the shepherd stepped right up to her, touched his nose to her glove, and whined softly. A sound he only made when he recognized someone he should trust. Jake's pulse kicked hard. Logan didn't forget people, and he never welcomed strangers. The woman swayed, snow whipping around her like the storm wanted to tear her away. "I need your help," she said. "My father told me. If anything ever happened to him, I had to find the man who lived in the cabin with the green roof." Jake felt the world narrow to a point. The roof of Maple Hollow cabin wasn't green anymore. The shingles had faded to a tired gray. But beneath the snow, under the years of rot, the original paint still clung to the wood like a memory refusing to die. Jake steadied her by the arm. "Who was your father?" She looked up, eyes glassy but determined. "His name was Daniel Cole, and he died because of something hidden in this cabin. Something only you and your dog can find." Lightning didn't strike. The earth didn't shake. But something colder than the wind slid beneath Jake's ribs, because Logan, still pressed against her side, wagged his tail once in a slow, deliberate motion. Recognition. As if he'd been waiting for her. As if he knew this storm wasn't the danger. She was the beginning. Avery Cole didn't collapse right away. She stood in the doorway for a breath, snow melting in her hair, the wooden box clutched tight to her chest like something alive inside it. Jake could see she was on the edge of exhaustion, yet her eyes stayed sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who had been running long before she ever stepped into this storm. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped weakly. Logan circled her, not with suspicion but with a strange, deliberate calm. He pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg, then sat at her feet. Jake stared at the dog, unsettled. He hadn't seen Logan choose someone like that since Samuel Ortiz died in Syria. "Take your coat off," Jake said. "You'll freeze if you stay like that." Avery nodded, every movement slow, as if her body were thawing too quickly. She set the box carefully on the table before sliding out of her soaked parka. Beneath it, she wore a grey wool sweater, the sleeves stretched and frayed. Her fingers trembled when she moved them too fast. Cold or fear? Jake couldn't tell. Logan stayed close, head slightly lowered, ears pricked forward, studying her. Jake kept his distance. He didn't know who she was or why she had come, but his dog's behavior was speaking louder than words. "How did you know my name?" Jake asked. Avery looked at the fire, gathering breath. "My father told me." Jake frowned. "I've never met him." She nodded. "I figured that. But he worked here, in these woods. This cabin was part of his old job back in the 80s, something he never talked about until the year he died." Jake looked at the box. "What kind of job?" Avery hesitated. It wasn't a big, dramatic pause. It was the kind where you could tell she'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but it still hurt to say out loud. He was a maintenance technician for a federal research program. Maple Hollow sector. That's what he called it. Something with cold weather telemetry and satellite calibration. He traveled between sites, mostly alone. Jake didn't interrupt her, though something in his gut tightened. Cold War-era crews often dealt with things they weren't allowed to explain. Avery's voice thinned. 3 months ago, they said he died in a hunting accident. But he wasn't the kind of man who made mistakes with a rifle. And he wasn't the kind to go hunting alone. She swallowed hard, fighting emotion, not embracing it. "I found this box in his workshop a week after the funeral, and a note taped underneath it. It said, 'If anything happens to me, find the cabin with the green roof. Find the man who can read between the lines.'" Jake felt the words settle like falling ice. The roof hadn't been green in decades, but under the peeling shingles he had noticed patches of faded paint the day he arrived. He'd thought nothing of it. Logan nudged the box with his nose, then backed up, tail stiff, posture alert. He gave a soft, throaty rumble, not of warning but of recognition. Jake had trained with Logan long enough to understand the difference. "What do you smell?" Jake murmured. Avery glanced at the dog, her eyes flicking with a mix of fear and hope. He acted like this outside too, like he already knew me, or knew something about me. Jake knelt beside Logan, checking his breathing, his focus. The dog wasn't agitated, he wasn't confused. His posture looked almost reverent, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for. Jake looked at Avery. "My dog doesn't walk up to strangers. Not like that. Not ever." Avery let out a shaky breath. Then maybe he remembers my father, or remembers what he left behind. Jake opened the box carefully. Inside was a folded map, brittle with age, and a ring of keys that didn't match any lock in the cabin. Beneath them were a stack of index cards filled with coded sequences, long strings of letters and numbers. Not random, purposefully structured. He recognized the pattern instantly. Encryption blocks. Avery spoke quietly. "I don't know what any of it means. But my father wrote one more line on another scrap." She pulled a small note from her pocket and handed it to Jake. The ink was smudged but readable. "If they come for me, they'll come for the cabin next." Jake felt his chest go tight. "They?" Avery didn't blink. "I think he was being followed. I think someone wanted whatever he was hiding. And I think he sent me here because he knew I'd be safer with someone who understands danger." Before Jake could respond, Logan stiffened. Not a slow alert, not curiosity, fearless tension, every muscle standing at attention. He turned toward the back wall again, the same warped boards he'd inspected earlier. He pressed his nose to the seam, tail rigid, breath sharp. He gave a single bark, deep and commanding. Jake's pulse jumped. Logan didn't bark like that without reason. Avery backed up, instinctively pressing one hand to the wooden table. What is he doing? Jake moved closer, his hand grazing the wall. It felt colder here. Too cold. The kind of cold that didn't match the rest of the cabin. Something hidden. Something sealed. Logan stepped back, watching Jake carefully. Then came the twist Jake didn't expect. A faint metallic click sounded behind the boards. Not from the wind, not from settling wood. A lock. Avery's eyes widened. That wasn't me. Jake's throat went dry. Someone had built something into the cabin walls. Someone who knew the structure well enough to hide a compartment that blended into the original framing. Logan stepped forward again, touching his paw to the lowest plank. A signal. A command. Find it. Jake took a breath, steady and controlled, the same way he used to prepare before breaching a door in enemy territory. The same quiet focus. He looked at Avery. Whatever your father was involved in, it didn't end with him. Logan growled once, short and decisive. Jake reached for the closest tool he had, an old iron pry bar resting near the hearth. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the shutters like fists against the walls. Avery clutched the map to her chest. Logan waited, unmoving, eyes locked on the board. Jake wedged the bar into the seam. Something inside the cabin shifted. Air pressure changed. A small, cold draft leaked from behind the wall. Jake pushed. The board gave way, and a hidden compartment slowly revealed itself, exhaling a breath of air that felt like it had been trapped for 40 years. Logan stepped, closer, sniffing deeply. Avery's voice was barely audible. My father was right. Jake didn't answer. Because behind the boards, resting in the darkness, was a metal case stamped with a faded federal emblem. And that was only the beginning. The cold draft seeping from behind the opened wall was sharp enough to sting. Jake angled the lantern closer, lighting the narrow recess hidden between the original cabin beams. Dust drifted down in soft spirals, each particle catching the firelight like falling ash. Logan stepped forward, sniffing deeply, tail stiff but controlled. Every line of his body communicated purpose. Jake trusted that body more than he trusted most people he had met in uniform. He slid an arm inside the hollow and pulled out the first object he touched. A metal case, heavy, rectangular, built with old military reinforcement. Its latch bore a faded crest that looked federal but outdated, from a generation long before modern encryption. The kind of equipment only found today in forgotten archives or classified basements. Avery covered her mouth with one hand. "I've seen that emblem in my father's workshop." Jake set the case on the table. It thudded like steel dropped on stone. Logan stayed close, watching it as though expecting it to move. "There's more," Jake muttered, reaching back into the dark. He pulled out a thick notebook wrapped in brittle cloth. When he unwrapped it, Avery let out a small, broken gasp. "That's his," she whispered. "That's my father's handwriting." Jake turned a few pages carefully. Lines of numbers and symbols filled the margins, written in a steady, meticulous hand. Notes about temperature shifts, analog signatures, maintenance logs, and scattered warnings scribbled more urgently. Avery pressed her palm to the paper as if afraid it might crumble under her touch. She kept her composure, but a tremor carried through her fingers. There was one more item inside. Jake retrieved it slowly. An old map, yellowed at the edges, folded into thirds. When he opened it across the table, Logan stepped closer and sniffed along a crease with intent, lingering on the corner where ink had blurred from moisture. The dog's tail shifted once, acknowledging something faint but familiar. Jake flattened the map. It displayed a section of northern Wisconsin, but not as any modern survey would show it. Boundaries were different, landmarks missing, roads that didn't exist now. Across the paper, red circles marked several sites around the forest. Next to them, handwritten notes read, "Maple Hollow Sector A, B, C, D." The circles connected by arrows, codes, and dates. Avery traced one of the circles with her finger. "My father mentioned this once. Not by name. He said he was assigned to a cold sector, something about satellite calibration. I thought it was boring technical talk." She looked up, eyes rimmed with disbelief. But why hide all of this? Before Jake answered, Logan let out a short bark. Not a warning. Not fear. It was the sound he made when confirming something, the same sound he had used on missions when picking up a scent trail. "You recognize this, buddy?" Jake knelt beside him. Logan pressed his paw onto the map, right over the largest circle. Avery stared. "Is he pointing?" Jake shook his head. "No, he's telling us that place mattered. Deeply." Avery's breathing grew unsteady. She stepped back from the table and wrapped her arms around herself. "My father wasn't supposed to come home the night he died. He told me he needed to finish something out here. He packed this map and his notes into that box the morning before he—" She paused, the ache in her throat tightening. "Before he was found at the edge of the woods with a gunshot wound ruled an accident." Jake felt something slide cold and heavy into his chest. A hunting accident wouldn't involve federal encryption modules. He flipped open the metal case. Inside, nestled in protective foam, lay a small device built of brushed steel and analog circuitry. Fins along its sides suggested early cooling systems. It was unmistakable. Cold War encryption module. Jake murmured. "Possibly a satellite uplink key generator." Avery frowned at him. "In English, please." Jake kept his eyes on the device. If someone wanted to disguise transmissions or override old data signals from that era, this could do it. Even now. Avery paled. So someone killed him for this? Jake didn't answer. Logan nudged his elbow, sensing the tension rising behind Jake's silence. Avery stepped back toward the map. Her voice came softer now, but steadier. My father never said he was scared. Not until last year. He kept checking the windows, watching the road, leaving lights on when he slept. He told me once that some truths should stay buried unless the wrong people started digging. Jake looked at her sharply. Did he say who they were? Avery shook her head. But he did say one thing. If they come for me, they'll come for the cabin next. Logan suddenly lifted his head, ears snapping forward. A deep rumble vibrated in his chest. Jake went still. That sound was unmistakable. The sound Logan made when something outside wasn't just moving, but approaching. Avery's face drained of color. Is someone out there? Jake lowered the lantern and moved to the window, keeping to the shadows. Snow whipped violently across the glass, but he saw it. A flicker of movement between the pines. Too steady. Too deliberate. Not the storm. He turned to Avery. Get away from the walls. She took a step towards him, eyes wide. Who is it? Jake didn't sugarcoat it. Someone who knew your father hid something. Someone who followed the map before you did. Logan moved between them and the door, posture squared, teeth bared in a silent snarl. His old injury didn't matter now. He looked every bit the warrior Jake trusted with his life. The storm hammered the cabin again, rattling the shutters. But this time Jake heard another sound buried underneath. Footsteps crunching, slowly toward the porch. Ivory clutched the map harder, her voice shaking. They found us. Jake reached for the nearest weapon he had, a long-handled fire poker still hot at the tip. No, he said quietly, positioning himself beside Logan. They found what your father died to protect, and now we find out what they want. Logan growled again, low and ready, the kind of sound that meant he had already chosen to fight. And somewhere outside, someone paused at the door. The cabin shook again, but no one tried the door. Whoever was outside had stepped back into the storm. Watching, waiting. Jake knew that kind of patience. It was the patience of trained men. Men who didn't rush unless ordered. He locked the door, checked the windows, then pulled Avery and Logan deeper into the cabin. The fire cast a dim glow over the table where the encryption module lay, metal cold enough to frost at the edges. Jake grabbed his portable field tablet, one of the few pieces of gear he'd brought from active duty. Old tech or not, it could still interface with analog signals if he ran the right conversions. Avery stayed close, arms wrapped around herself, eyes never leaving the module. Logan stood between them, guarding both at once, ears flicking towards the storm each time the wind shifted. Jake connected improvised leads to the module and powered the tablet. The screen flickered, static lines cutting across it before stabilizing into a crude display. A low hum filled the room. Logan tilted his head, recognizing the sound but not liking it. "What are you doing?" Avery asked, her voice tight, trying to wake something that hasn't spoken in 40 years. He typed a sequence, fingers steady despite the cold. Then he fed one of the coded index cards into the manual reader he'd rigged. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the screen pulsed once, and a single word appeared. Red lantern. Avery inhaled sharply. "What is that?" I've seen those words in his journals, but he always crossed them out, like he wasn't supposed to write them. Jake didn't immediately answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen as more text began to emerge in bursts of corrupted letters and fragmented code. The module wasn't dead. It was responding. Jake scrolled through the flickering files. Most were damaged beyond recognition, but a few phrases were intact. Thermal anomaly sweep. Unauthorized uplink. Data masking protocol. This wasn't weather telemetry. It wasn't satellite maintenance. This was covert military work. Ivory stepped beside him. Her voice trembled. "My father tried to tell me once. I was 16. He said, 'If you ever see the signs, find someone who knows war. Someone who knows how men hide the truth.'" Jake stopped typing. He looked at her fully for the first time. Ivory swallowed. "He didn't mean a teacher or a journalist. He meant someone like you." Logan pressed his head lightly against Jake's arm, grounding him. The shepherd's warmth contrasted the cold that had crept up Jake's spine. He didn't want to be part of anyone's prophecy. He didn't want to be the soldier chosen for someone else's unfinished war. But the module, the hidden wall, the footsteps outside, they were undeniable. The tablet beeped. A file opened on its own, as if triggered by the patterns Jake had fed into it. A shaky black-and-white video filled the screen. Grainy. Silent. A timestamp from 1984 blinked faintly in the corner. The image showed a clearing in the woods. A team of technicians around a tall, narrow antenna array. A group of men in unmarked winter gear. Avery leaned close. Dad worked with a crew like that. Jake narrowed his eyes. One of the men in the video fit her father's profile. But what caught Jake's attention wasn't the technicians. It was the men behind them, armed, rigid, watching the workers instead of the equipment. Paramilitary, not federal. Jake rewound the footage and zoomed on the sleeve patch of one of the armed men. Most of the patch was blurred, but a thin diagonal mark cut across it. Not enough for an ID, but enough to know they weren't government. Ivory covered her mouth. My father wasn't supposed to be anywhere near those kinds of people. Jake clicked to the next recovered file. A document flashed briefly before the module glitched and shut itself down, as if reacting defensively. Jake caught only fragments. Red Lantern Protocol signal diversion, civilian casualties, reclassified asset relocation necessary. Avery stared, her eyes wide and hollow. They were covering something up. And my father? He must have refused to help them. Logan growled softly, ears pinned. Not toward the door or window this time. Toward the module. Jake understood why. The module held something dangerous. Something Logan could sense even without knowing what it was. In the field, Logan had reacted the same way when explosives or hostile intent lurked nearby. This box wasn't just a relic. It was a key. Jake shut the tablet off and stepped back. Flashbacks he'd kept buried began breaking through. The explosion that took Ortiz, the smoke curling through the night sky over Rakkar, the weight of Logan bleeding in his arms. Mission after mission where orders hid more than they revealed. He blinked hard, pulling himself back. Logan nudged his thigh, sensing the shift in Jake's breathing. Avery watched him quietly. "You've seen things like this before, haven't you?" Jake didn't answer immediately, but the truth was sitting between them, heavy as the module. "There are projects," he finally said, "that were built to hide mistakes, or to hide the people who knew too much about them. Red Lantern sounds like one of those." Avery's shoulders caved. Then my father never stood a chance. Jake stepped toward her. "You said he left a message. Something about signs." Ivory nodded. "He told me. If anything ever looks out of place, look for the man who can read the patterns others ignore." Jake's jaw clenched. That wasn't luck. That wasn't coincidence. Her father had predicted someone would come, someone trained to see what civilians wouldn't. Outside, a branch cracked in the storm. Jake and Logan turned their heads at the same time. Avery froze. "Someone is still out there," she whispered. Jake grabbed the pry bar again, but Logan moved first. The shepherd stepped between Avery and the door, body low, tail straight, the same way he had before charging into smoke and gunfire overseas. Jake felt a chill crawl through the room, separate from the wind. Avery's voice cracked. My father was trying to lead me to you, to this place, to whatever he died protecting. Jake tightened his grip on the bar. He didn't say it out loud, but he understood. The girl hadn't arrived by chance. She had been delivered into the heart of something that had begun long before Jake ever set foot in Maple Hollow. And Logan, standing like a sentinel in the dim light, had known it from the moment she crossed the snow. The storm was no longer a storm. It was a living thing, pressing its weight against the walls, howling through the cracks, rattling the glass as if it wanted inside. Snow slammed the cabin so hard it felt like fists hitting wood. But inside, the real pressure came from the silence. Logan broke it first. He trotted toward the far corner of the room, nose low, breath quickening. His posture sharpened into that precise, surgical focus Jake knew too well. It was the stance Logan used when finding wounded soldiers under rubble or tracking the scent of buried explosives. Carefully, he pawed at a loose floorboard. Jake moved fast, kneeling beside him. Good boy, he murmured, lifting the plank with the pry bar. Logan stepped back, but kept his eyes locked on the exposed darkness below. A sealed canvas bag rested inside the small cavity. Dust-covered, tied tight with military-grade cord, the kind of bag soldiers used to move classified field materials. Jake lifted it out carefully. Avery swallowed. That's my father's. The knot was complex, tied in a way only technicians trained in federal labs used. Jake loosened it, then opened the flap. Files, folders, old microfilm reels in protective sleeves. A thick envelope marked, "For internal use only." Logan sniffed the air above the pile, then stepped aside, as if understanding what they were about to uncover. Jake opened the envelope first. Pages slid out, some crisp, others brittle. He spread them on the table. Avery leaned forward, her breath catching as she read the headers. Project Red Lantern, Satellite Encryption and Event Reclassification Protocols. For authorized personnel only. Jake scanned the pages, jaw tightening. This wasn't a weather project. It wasn't even a standard communications test. It was an offensive data manipulation program. Avery's eyes moved quickly, following each line. Event reclassification? What does that even mean? Jake pointed to the margin. A handwritten note from her father. Diversion of signal logs, following accidental incidents. Non-compliant crew warned. Avery pressed a hand to her mouth. They weren't tracking weather. They were covering up military accidents. Jake nodded grimly. And not small ones. Look at the dates. He pointed at a list. 1982, 1984, 1986. Known crashes, known fires, known training disasters, all reclassified as mechanical failures or pilot error. Avery whispered the words as if they burned on her tongue. They hid lives. They hid deaths. Jake opened another folder. Inside, her father had outlined the internal dissent among technicians. Only 3 had refused to participate. Their names were listed. At the top was Thomas Cole. Avery's breath broke. He tried to stop them. Jake turned another page. This one detailed a procurement request from an off-book private contractor. The name hit him like a blow. Black Ridge Operations. Avery stiffened. I've heard him say that name. Once, he said those men didn't believe in oversight. Jake kept reading. The private group had been trying to get access to the encryption module for years. It would allow them to spoof federal satellite signatures, mask illegal operations, and manipulate data trails. If someone owned a device like this, they could rewrite the story of any incident that touched the sky. Avery stared at the table in horror. They needed the module. And my father? He refused to give it to them. Jake nodded slowly. And he died days later. The temperature in the room seemed to drop further, even with the fire burning hot. The truth had weight. the kind that squeezed the air from your lungs. Logan suddenly lifted his head. His ears snapped forward. His body grew rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Ivory stepped back instinctively. "Logan, what is it?" Jake moved to the window, staying low, staying silent. The snow was thick enough to blur shapes, but not enough to hide movement completely. A shadow drifted near the tree line, then another. 3 figures now. Slow, broad-shouldered, moving in formation. Jake's throat tightened. Black Ridge. They're already here. Avery's face drained of color. Jake grabbed the files, stuffing them back into the bag. He kept the encryption module close. Logan stayed at the door, muscles tensed like coiled steel. Avery's voice cracked. "They found the cabin. They found us." Jake shook his head. "Not us. They came for what your father protected." A heavy thud landed against the porch outside. Ivory jumped. Logan barked once, loud and sharp, the same bark that had saved Jake's life more than once. Then came the second twist. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then went out completely. The fire dimmed as if a sudden gust of wind had choked it. But Jake knew it wasn't the wind. Someone outside had cut power to the backup battery system buried under the cabin. Avery whispered, terrified. "How do they know so much about this place?" Jake's voice went cold. "Because your father wasn't the only one who built it." Logan stood by, the door tail straight, head lowered, every instinct ready. Jake grabbed Avery's wrist. "We move now. We stay alive by staying ahead of them." The wind screamed outside. Snow battered the roof like claws. But the danger wasn't in the storm. It was walking toward the cabin with purpose. And Logan, old warrior that he was, braced himself for the fight that was coming. The storm had swallowed the forest whole, but the sound of engines cut through it like teeth through ice. Jake's head snapped toward the window. Logan was already there, body rigid, ears locked forward. His growl vibrated through the floorboards. 3 trucks, big ones, dark bodies and no plates. Their headlights carved harsh beams across the snow before dying out all at once, plunging the woods back into darkness. Black Ridge had found them. Jake moved fast, grabbing Avery by the arm. "Stay behind me. Do not move unless I tell you to." Avery clutched the wooden box to her chest, breath trembling. Logan stayed at the door, shoulders squared, tail stiff, issuing that deep, primal rumble Jake had heard only in firefights. The warning that death was closing in. Outside, boots hit the snow. Slow. Measured. 5 sets. Jake killed the lanterns. Shadows swallowed everything but the weak flicker of fire dying in the hearth. A voice carried through the storm. Calm. Cold. "Jake Mercer, we know you're inside. Turn over the module and no one gets hurt." Avery whispered. "They know your name." Jake didn't answer. He was already pulling the rug off the floor, exposing the hatch to the old maintenance space below. "Get in," he ordered. Ivory shook her head. "Not without Logan." Jake's jaw twitched. "Logan stays with me. He'll keep them off long enough for you to make it to the far vent. Go." The first strike hit the cabin door so hard the hinges screamed. Ivory flinched. Logan didn't. He simply shifted his stance, lowering into a posture Jake had seen on dusty roads in Syria, the posture of a K9 ready to die for his handler. Jake opened the hatch. Ivory climbed down, stumbling into the cold cavity beneath the floor. Jake lowered the hatch and whispered, "Make no sound." A second hit came at the door. Then the third tore it clean off its frame. 5 figures stormed in, rifles raised, masks dripping with melting snow. Logan launched before the first man even cleared the doorway. 80 pounds of trained force slammed into the operative's chest, knocking him backward into the night. A weapon clattered onto the porch. Jake swung the iron fire poker like a blade, catching the second operative across the jaw. The man dropped instantly. The third rushed him. Jake tackled him into the wall, but the man countered with a hard elbow that clipped Jake's ribs. Pain shot through him, but he drove a knee into the attacker's stomach and threw him down. A gunshot cracked through the cabin. Logan yelped. Jake's world froze. Logan stumbled, his back leg folding beneath him. Blood speckled the floor like dark stars. The K9 didn't fall. He forced himself upright, barking, snarling, driving the shooter back with raw willpower. Jake roared, slamming the attacker with such force that both men crashed into the table. Files scattered across the floor. A hush fell. Then a new figure stepped into the doorway. He didn't wear a mask. Avery's breath caught from beneath the floorboards, because even through the cracks she saw his face. Mark Danner, her father's old teammate, missing for 10 years, declared dead. His expression was carved from stone. Avery Cole's kid. I should have known you'd come looking. Jake stepped between them. You betrayed her father. You killed him. Danner shook his head once. I didn't kill him, but I didn't stop the ones who did. Avery covered her mouth, choking back a sob. Jake was ready to strike, but Danner raised a hand. I need the module, and if you fight, the men outside won't hesitate to level this cabin. Logan growled, even as blood dripped down his leg. Jake could see his breathing hitch, but the dog refused to back away. Before anyone could move, Logan lunged again, aiming not for the attacker's weapon but for his arm, clamping down with enough force to break bone. The room erupted. Another operative fired. Jake shoved Danner aside and dove for Logan, but the bullet hit the floor where Logan had been a heartbeat earlier. The K9 dragged the gunman down, buying Jake an opening. Jake slammed his fist into the shooter's throat, knocking him out cold. Danner cursed, retreating toward the door. This isn't over, Mercer. Blackridge doesn't lose. Jake grabbed Logan, pulling him back just as the remaining operatives fired into the cabin from outside. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and snow rushed in like smoke. Danner vanished into the storm. Jake shut the ruined door with what remained of the frame and dropped to his knees beside Logan. The dog lay panting, eyes alert but glassy, his body shaking from pain and adrenaline. Easy, buddy. I'm here. Logan nudged Jake's hand, refusing to close his eyes, refusing to stop fighting. From beneath the floor, Jake heard Avery whisper his name, terrified. Jake lifted Logan into his arms, determined, breath ragged. They were hunted. They were outnumbered. But as long as Logan was alive, retreat wasn't defeat. It was survival. And Jake Mercer had never lost a fight he refused to surrender. The cabin was barely standing. Snow blasted through the splintered doorway, sweeping across the floor where spent casings glinted like cold stars. Jake knelt beside Logan, hands trembling as he wrapped pressure bandages around the shepherd's bleeding hind leg. Logan's breath hitched, but he refused to look away from Jake. Even half-conscious, he guarded him. Avery climbed out of the crawl space the second the gunfire stopped. She fell onto her knees beside Logan, tears streaking the soot on her face. Logan lifted his head, weak but steady, and pressed his muzzle into her palm, the smallest touch, a promise that he was still fighting. Jake forced air into his lungs. We're not losing him. Not tonight. He reached into his vest and pulled out his last resort, the PLB, a personal locator beacon used only in life-or-death scenarios. He flipped the cap and held down the button until the tiny red LED pulsed a steady heartbeat. Signal sent. The wind swallowed the sound, but Jake knew the satellite heard it. Now we move, he told Avery. They stepped outside into the screaming white void. The trucks were gone. Tire marks cut a fresh trail toward the Ridge Road. Black Ridge had retreated into the storm, probably regrouping. Jake half-carried, half-lifted Logan into the snow, wrapping him in an emergency thermal blanket. Avery stayed close, shielding Logan's face from the wind with her hands. Minutes dragged. The cold gnawed at them. But then a faint hum broke through the blizzard. Avery gasped. "Jake, do you hear that?" He did. Rotors. A floodlight tore through the darkness, washing the trees in brilliant gold. The helicopter descended with a roar that beat back even the storm. Painted across the side were the letters that made Jake exhale in relief. DHS North Division. 2 rescue agents jumped out before the skids even touched the snow. One was a tall woman with slate-black braids pulled tight under her helmet, eyes sharp and fast. The other was younger, maybe mid-20s, blonde hair visible under his beanie, jaw square with an attitude that didn't match his baby face. The young one frowned. "Which one of you hit a federal PLB?" Jake raised a hand. "Former SEAL. My K-9 is critical. We were attacked by Black Ridge operations." The woman, Agent Lena Hart, immediately knelt beside Logan. "Oh, hell. He's holding on, but he's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him airborne now." Logan weakly wagged his tail once when she touched him. The young agent, Dylan Brooks, crossed his arms. "I don't understand. Black Ridge? Here? In a snowstorm? And you expect us to—" He stopped, because Logan lifted his head, struggling, pain shaking his whole body, but he pushed through it to lick Avery's shaking hand. Slow, gentle, like he was comforting her instead of the other way around. Dylan froze. His expression cracked. Is he comforting her? After taking a bullet? Jake nodded. He saved us all. Dylan swallowed hard, eyes softening with a quiet shame. "Look, I didn't buy your story at first. A lot of guys claim danger to get free evac rides. But this." He glanced at Logan again. "No dog in pain does that unless he's the real deal." A new tone entered his voice. Respect. And something else. Determination. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Whatever it is, I'm in." A tiny twist, but it shifted everything. Avery stepped forward. "Black Ridge has taken interest in something my father hid. We have the module. It needs to be secured by your division." Agent Hart gestured toward the chopper. "Then let's secure it. Both of you get in." Dylan lifted Logan carefully, whispering, "Easy. Boy, I got you." The shepherd didn't resist. He pressed his nose to Dylan's sleeve, trusting the stranger as if reading his intentions. As soon as they loaded into the helicopter, Agent Hart radioed the ground team. "Team Bravo, converge on Maple Hollow perimeter. Targets are Black Ridge operatives in dark tactical gear. They are armed and hostile. Bring restraints." Static crackled. Then, "Copy that. Interception in progress." The helicopter lifted into the storm, blades carving a clean path through chaos. From the window, Avery saw dark shapes sprinting across the snow below. DHS agents tackled 2 men near the tree line. Another operative was dragged out of a truck with his hands behind his head. Black Ridge wasn't escaping this time. Jake leaned back, exhaustion flooding through him. Not relief. He didn't trust that emotion anymore. But the first crack in the fear appeared. "They'll be prosecuted?" Avery asked quietly. Agent Hart nodded. "The evidence you have ties them directly to classified program tampering and homicide. They're done." Avery exhaled for the first time in hours. Logan stirred. His eyes flicked to Jake, then Avery, then Dylan. He seemed to make sure they were all present before settling his head on Jake's lap. Jake stroked his fur. "You held the line again, buddy." The medic began cleaning Logan's wound, working fast with field precision. "He's strong," she said, "and he's got a hell of a will. He'll make it." Avery wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. "My father always said dogs are the first to sense the truth. Logan, he knew something I didn't." Jake squeezed her hand. He knew who needed protection. Dylan looked back at them from the cockpit doorway. "Once Logan stabilizes, the module goes straight to the federal lab in Duluth. No detours. I'll personally escort it. Nobody's touching it unless they outrank me by a mile. Jake nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. Dylan glanced at Logan again. Thank him. The helicopter cut through the storm, carrying them toward safety, toward answers, toward justice. Below them, Black Ridge was being put in cuffs. Inside the cabin of the helicopter, Logan's breathing grew steadier. Justice had arrived in the middle of the blizzard, and in that violent, freezing night, healing finally began. Spring came late to northern Wisconsin. Snow still clung stubbornly to the shaded slopes, but the air had lost its bite, and the sun finally carried warmth instead of warning. The world thawed slow, like it wasn't sure it trusted peace yet. Neither was Jake. He stood outside the K9 Veterans Clinic in Ironwood, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth. For the first time in months, the wind didn't feel like it was pushing him back into the past. He watched through the glass window as Logan, bandaged but alert, rested on a padded recovery bed. A faint tremor ran through Jake's chest when he saw the shepherd lift his head. He's still fighting, Jake murmured to himself. Inside, Avery sat cross-legged near Logan, reading softly from a worn notebook. Not her father's notes, those had already been passed to DHS forensic archivists, but a journal she'd begun during Logan's recovery. Sometimes she read aloud. Sometimes she just talked to him like he was another human in the room. Logan seemed to prefer either option over silence. Jake entered quietly. Logan's ears perked the way they always did when Jake approached, even before his eyes opened. The shepherd's tail gave a slow, dragging thump against the cushion. Jake knelt. There you are, buddy. Logan pushed his muzzle into Jake's palm, warm breath puffing against his skin. For a moment, Jake felt the entire storm, the chaos, the fight, the blood in the snow, all collapsing into something small enough to bear. Avery closed the notebook. He's doing better today. They said he put weight on the leg this morning. Jake smiled. That's my boy. There was no bravado in his voice. Only pride. Only gratitude. A nurse stepped inside the room. Jake, Avery, Dr. Hanley wants to give you both an update. Dr. Hanley, a grey-bearded veterinarian with a calm center and military posture, waited in the hallway. Logan's stable, he said without ceremony. Stronger than expected. A lot of dogs would have shut down after a hit like that. But he didn't. Jake nodded. He's always been stubborn. That's not stubborn, Dr. Hanley corrected. That's loyalty sharpened into willpower. That dog held on because he believed he had something left to protect. Avery's eyes softened, shining in the morning light. He protected all of us. The old doctor gave a small smile. Give him another week. Then you can take him home. Jake exhaled slowly. Home. The cabin didn't quite feel like that yet, but maybe it could. Avery brushed her scarf back. What about you, Jake? Any word? He hesitated. Then he handed her a folded letter. From Naval Command. She read silently, her breath catching halfway through. They cleared you, she said. Jake nodded. No disciplinary action. They reviewed the logs, the PLB signal, the federal statements. Everything. They ruled that I acted within my duty to prevent the misuse of classified technology. Avery looked up. So you're free? As free as a man can be after too many wars, he said. But yes, I'm not being recalled. She let out a long breath, relief flickering across her face. But there was more. Jake pulled another file from his jacket. This one belonged to Avery. DHS delivered the full report this morning, he said. She took it, hands trembling before she even opened it. Her father's face stared back at her from the first page. The new classification stamped across the top shifted everything. Homicide. Her knees weakened, and she sat on the hallway bench. Jake stood close but didn't touch her. He let her find her breath. He was right, Ivory whispered. All these years. He was right. They killed him because he tried to stop them. Her shoulders began to shake, but not from grief alone. It was vindication, the kind that hurt as much as it healed. Jake lowered himself beside her. He didn't tell her it would be okay. One thing war taught him. Truth didn't erase pain. It only made it easier to name. Avery wiped her eyes. They're going to restore his clearance status, his record, everything. His name goes back where it should have always been. They're even opening a federal inquiry into Red Lantern's oversight. She closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it carried all the years she lost to unanswered questions. Then she smiled through tears. He deserved this. Jake nodded. And you earned it. They sat together in the quiet hallway. Through the glass, Logan perked up when he saw both of them. He gave a short, soft bark, the first since the storm night. It echoed faintly, a small, stubborn declaration of life. Avery stood, laughing under her breath. Is he calling us? Jake smirked. That's his way of saying we're not done yet. They walked into the room. Logan tried to stand, wobbling slightly but determined. Dr. Hanley rushed forward. Easy, soldier. You'll have your moment. Just not today. Ivory kneeled and wrapped her arms around Logan, pressing her cheek into the warm fur at his neck. You scared us, you know that? Logan nudged her chin, then looked at Jake with eyes that said what neither of them could. They were a pack now, bound not by blood, but by surviving something the world would never fully understand. A soft knock came at the door. Agent Dylan Brooks stepped in, half smiling, still awkward in his uniform. Got updates, he said. Black Ridge leadership is in custody. The ones who tried to run didn't get far. DHS wants you two to know the case is airtight. He nodded toward Logan. And we're submitting him for a federal commendation. Just thought you'd want the heads up. Jake raised an eyebrow. Commendation? For him? Dylan chuckled. He saved your lives. And mine if we're counting. The kid deserves a medal. Jake looked at Logan. Logan, hearing his name, attempted another proud wag. Avery laughed softly. He'll try to act humble, but don't let him fool you. He likes attention. Jake smiled. Yeah, he always has. Dylan gave them a small salute and stepped out, leaving the three of them in warm silence. Avery brushed Logan's fur. Jake, what will you do now? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the window, toward the distant tree line thawing under a cautious spring sun. For years he'd only known war, loss, and the ghosts that clung to the quiet hours. But now there was something else waiting. He looked at Logan, at Avery, at the file that vindicated a dead man. Maybe, he said quietly, we try rebuilding something worth staying for. Ivory's breath hitched, hope flickering just behind her eyes. Logan pressed his paw gently onto Jake's boot, sealing the moment. Outside, winter melted into the earth. Inside, something heavier melted from the heart. A season had passed, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. The gravel road to Maple Hollow Cabin was softer now, patches of snow clinging to the shadows beneath the evergreens. It had been almost 2 months since the night everything snapped open. Truth, danger, grief, all tangled together like broken wire. Now the world seemed quieter, as if the land itself was trying to apologize for what it had witnessed. Jake stepped out of the truck first. The cabin stood scarred and humbled, bullet holes stitched across the siding, the green roof dented where a rifle stock had struck during the breach. But it was still standing, stubborn, like the dog trotting ahead of him. Logan walked carefully, his limp lighter now, the bandage long gone, but the pink scar visible beneath the fur on his hind leg. Every step was deliberate, as though he understood he was returning to the place where he had nearly died, and refused to be afraid of it. Ivory followed, holding a canvas folder against her chest. Her eyes softened when she saw the cabin. "It feels smaller," she whispered. Jake nodded. "Traumas shrink after you survive them." She laughed under her breath. "Only you would say that like a proverb." He shrugged, though a smile tugged at his mouth. Years as a SEAL had carved humor into something dry and quiet. Avery had been learning to read it. They walked toward the cabin. Logan stopped at the threshold, sniffing the air. His tail swept slowly, like he was confirming what Jake already felt. The danger was gone. The ghosts were quieter now. Jake pushed open the door. Inside, the room was exactly as they had left it. Splintered wood from the breach, a cracked lamp on the floor, the wall where the hidden compartment had been carved open like a wound. The place looked like it had held a war, and in its own way it had. Avery brushed her fingers over the bullet-pitted doorway. "We have so much to fix." Jake knelt beside the wall. "Then let's fix it." They worked for hours, not in silence this time. There was conversation, soft and uneven, the kind shared by people who had survived something together and didn't yet know how to let go of each other. As Jake hammered new beams into place, he noticed Avery watching the light fall through the cracked window. Her eyes carried a new steadiness. Ever since her father was vindicated, the grief hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape, becoming something she could live beside instead of being crushed under. "What's in the folder?" Jake asked during a break. Avery opened it. Inside were sketches, maps, copied documents, and a hand-drawn blueprint of the cabin's interior. "I'm starting something," she said. "Maple Hollow Archives." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Archives? My father used to say the worst crimes are the ones buried on purpose. I want a place for hidden truths, lost technicians, vanished, reports, people like him who refused to disappear." Jake studied her for a long moment. Avery wasn't trying to avenge her father. She was trying to honor him, to keep others from falling into the same silence. "It's a good thing," he said. "It's a necessary thing." She corrected. A warm bark cut through their quiet. Logan trotted toward them with a stick in his mouth, tail swaying like he had discovered a treasure. Avery laughed. Jake smiled. "You ready to get back to work, buddy?" Logan dropped the stick at his feet, then sat upright, patient, alert, proud. Jake reached down and ruffled his fur. "This place belongs to you as much as us." As the afternoon light turned gold, a different truck rumbled up the path. A man in his mid-40s stepped out wearing a DHS jacket and carrying 2 boxes. His name was Mark Harlow, one of the administrators overseeing the fallout from the Red Lantern inquiry. "Just checking on the heroes of Maple Hollow," he called. Ivory blushed. Jake looked irritated but didn't fight it. Harlow placed the boxes on the porch. Documents declassified from the old Red Lantern payroll. Technical rosters. Logs. Figured they belonged with your archives. Avery blinked quickly. "You brought these for me?" "For the person who made the feds reopen a 37-year-old case." Harlow grinned. "Yeah, we did." Jake carried the boxes inside while Avery thanked the agent. Logan followed, sniffing each one like it contained something sacred. When Harlow left, Jake and Avery sat at the table. The weight of the documents felt like the weight of a new purpose settling into the room. "You know," Jake said slowly, "I've been thinking too." "About what?" He hesitated, then met her eyes. Vets come back with stories they can't tell, burdens they can't carry alone. The closest support center is 3 counties away. I want to build something here. Workshops, peer meetings, a quiet room, a place where those guys can breathe again. Avery leaned forward. A PTSD support center? Jake nodded. Maybe small, but real. Avery smiled. You and Logan could anchor it. At the sound of his name, Logan perked up, tail brushing the floor with a soft rhythm. In the weeks that followed, Logan became more than a mascot. He became a symbol. Word spread fast in Ironwood and the surrounding forests. The shepherd who protected two strangers in the night, who fought armed operatives in a snowstorm, who survived against odds that should have broken him. Locals asked to meet him. Parents brought their kids to see him. Veterans sat beside him in silence, grounding themselves through the steady rise and fall of his breath. He seemed to understand each person differently. With children, he was gentle. With soldiers, he was still and solid as a stone. With Avery, he guarded her with soft eyes. With Jake, he stood at his side like a brother. One afternoon, as Avery cleaned debris off the porch, a teenage boy approached hesitantly. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too big and kept his hands buried deep in the pockets. "Mom?" he said, voice shaking. Is Logan here?" Avery nodded. "Sure, come in." The boy entered slowly, eyes drifting to Logan lying near the table. The shepherd lifted his head, studying the kid. The boy swallowed hard. "My brother, he didn't come back from deployment last year. I thought, maybe, could I just sit with him, with the dog?" Logan stood. He walked over. And then, with quiet certainty, he leaned his whole weight against the boy's leg. The boy broke, shoulders trembling, breath fractured. Avery felt tears rise. Jake watched from the doorway. This was what he had hoped for when he envisioned the PTSD support group. Not some formal program, but moments like this, small, human, real. Later, as the sun fell and the cabin glowed warm from the inside, Avery stood beside Jake on the porch. "We rebuilt this place," she said softly, "but I think it rebuilt us too." Jake slipped his hands into his pockets. "Maybe," and Logan rebuilt the rest. They looked at the dog lying proudly on the steps, eyes half closed, tail curled around his paws. The shepherd seemed to watch the forest with a kind of old wisdom, as if guarding the cabin from the memories of the storm. Legacy wasn't something carved in stone. Here, in the quiet woods of Wisconsin, it was written by a former SEAL, a persistent daughter, and a shepherd who refused to break. And it was only the beginning. The wind was gentle that morning, carrying the first true warmth of late spring across the small clearing behind Maple Hollow cabin. What used to be a rugged hillside was now flattened into an open space filled with wooden benches, a modest stage built from reclaimed lumber, and a banner gently swaying between 2 white pines. Maple Hollow Veteran and K-9 Recovery Program Honoring Service. Restoring Hope. Families from Ironwood, nearby towns, and even a few out-of-state veterans gathered for the opening ceremony. Children ran in small circles, bundled in bright jackets. Retired soldiers sat with stiff backs and tired eyes that softened when Logan approached, tail sweeping the ground like a quiet greeting. The shepherd moved slowly but proudly, his limp nearly unnoticeable now. Every person he stopped beside reached down to touch him, and every time he leaned into them with a soft grunt of recognition, as if saying, "I see you. I remember your kind of pain." Jake stood near the stage with Avery, both watching the community form around the very place that had once been a battleground. The cabin's repaired walls gleamed behind them, and the forest stretched endless and alive. A reporter from a regional outlet stepped forward, microphone in hand. She was mid-30s, curious eyes, the kind who didn't just look for quotes but stories beneath them. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "today's a big moment. A program like this, it doesn't just appear overnight. Why here?" Jake glanced at the repaired roof, the porch rebuilt, plank by plank, the land that had nearly swallowed him whole, and then taught him how to breathe again, because this place saved us before we ever tried to save it." The reporter smiled warmly. "One more question. Everyone knows Logan's story by now. The night he fought off armed operatives. The night he held on for his life. Why did you keep him with you through everything? Why stay by his side instead of letting him retire quietly somewhere far from danger?" Jake turned to the shepherd standing beside him. Logan stood tall despite the scar on his leg, fur gleaming against the morning sun. Jake placed his hand gently on the dog's head. "He didn't just protect the truth," Jake said softly. "He protected the part of me I thought was gone." A hush fell over the crowd. A few veterans bowed their heads. Ivory blinked hard, trying to hide the emotion rising fast behind her eyes. Jake looked up, gaze meeting the camera lens pointed his way. His hazel eyes steadied, and a quiet strength slipped into his voice. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The cameraman lowered the equipment a fraction, struck by the genuine weight of the question. Avery stepped forward to speak about the archives. Agents from DHS talked about reforming protocols. Locals shared stories of their own service dogs, lost companions, and the healing that had only just begun. But Jake stepped back from the crowd, letting the noise wash over him without pulling him under. He walked to the hill just behind the clearing. Logan followed, steady as always. When they reached the top, Logan paused. The shepherd stood tall at the ridge, staring deep into the forest. His ears pricked forward, his tail held still, his body leaned just slightly, as though listening to a voice only he could hear. Jake watched him. "What is it, buddy?" Logan didn't move for a long moment. The wind shifted, rustling the pines. A bird darted between branches. The world held its breath. Then Logan turned his head slightly, looking back at Jake with eyes that carried something ancient, something knowing. Jake knelt, resting a hand on Logan's shoulder. "You think there's more out there, don't you?" The shepherd's gaze returned to the trees. Not fearful, not restless, just aware. Ivory joined them on the hill, a folder of archival notes tucked under her arm. "Everything okay?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Logan's just reminding me the story isn't over." Ivory smiled. Stories like his never are. The three of them stood together, facing the deep green of the Wisconsin forest. The same forest that once hid danger, but now held possibility. A place where secrets had been buried, found, and rewritten. A place where healing had begun with a knock in the middle of a snowstorm. Below them, the ceremony continued. Children played with wooden canine carvings. Veterans shared coffee and stories. The banner fluttered under the sun, carrying the name of a program built from survival and stubborn hope. Jake stood. Avery stood. Logan remained on the ridge a moment longer, watching as though guarding something only he understood. Then he trotted down the hill, tail wagging once, slow and deliberate. A promise. Jake exhaled. "Ready to go back down there, buddy?" Logan barked once in answer. The three walked back toward the clearing, toward their community, their rebuilt cabin, and the next chapter waiting just beyond the tree line. And as the camera crews filmed the event, Jake's final question lingered in the air like breath on a cold morning. "What's your story with a loyal pet? Before this story ends, we'd love to hear yours. Share your memories, your companions, and your moments of courage or healing with the German Shepherd community. Like, comment, and subscribe to support more stories just like Logan's, stories of loyalty, bravery, and the bond that changes everything. Because sometimes a hero walks on 4 legs, and sometimes a whole world is rebuilt because of him.